What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. Our first edition of the pod since the Patriots season has ended. We have some loose ends to tie up here. Even though we are the Next Pats podcast, we'll be tying up 2022 Patriots season loose ends, talking about what to expect in 2023 based on what we saw this past season. But we're also going to be talking to our guy, Mike Renner of Pro Football Focus, their lead draft analyst. He just came out with his most recent mock draft. He has the Patriots taking a player that I'm going to guess you haven't seen linked to the Patriots just yet, but he feels like the ultimate Patriots fit at the cornerback position. And if you get a chance to watch some of this guy, and all you have to do is search his name on Twitter and the highlights will populate very, very quickly, you're going to fall in love with him. I promise. He already is, I know, going to be one of my favorite players in this year's draft, not just because he's already considered one of the top corners in the draft, and I think that's a need for this Patriots team in 2023, but it's the style of play that he has. It's his ability to transition, which is something that we know the Patriots value. We talked about that with Jack Jones and his playing style earlier this year when we spoke to him for the Next Pats podcast. Marcus Jones, that ability to transition quickly, to click and close, quote unquote, and get from point A to point B extraordinarily fast. That's what this player appears to have. But let's let Mike Renner tell you more about him. Here's our conversation with Mike. All right, there he is. There's our guy, lead draft analyst for Pro Football Focus, Mike Renner. Mike, thanks for being back with us here on Next Pats, man.
I appreciate you having me on a little earlier this year than usual. Usually it's around combine time, but
we pigeonhole you. Yeah. We get you right around the combine. I'm not saying we won't still do that and just grab you by the lapel and drag you off to whatever corner of the Indianapolis Convention Center we're posted up in. But I wanted to get you on this week because Patriots fans, like it or not, for them, are already looking ahead to the draft, something that they're not used to at this point in January. And you recently came out with an updated mock draft for the first round Patriots at the 14th overall slot. And I wanted to ask you who you had the Patriots taking there, because it's a name that I'm not that familiar with. I'm not sure many people in New England would be familiar with because he doesn't play for a big-time, quote-unquote, program.
Devon Witherspoon, Illinois cornerback. Pats fans, if he goes, he just feels like a New England Patriot type of player. Now, I've gone back through and I try to figure out, sort of draft trends. What do different GMs, decision makers kind of value when they're looking at draft picks? And to me, Bill Belichick, if he has a type, it's football players. It's guys who play the game the right way, sort of players. And Devon Witherspoon, Illinois cornerback, fits that to a T. I mean, he is a guy that is going to hit you. He's going to come up and tackle in the run game. He is going to do the dirty work that no one sees in terms of taking on blocks on the outside, setting the edge on those screens and whatnot. And he's a damn good press man corner. 113 snaps of press coverage this year. He allowed 1 yard in press coverage. So a little bit of a late bloomer, maybe a little undersized at 180 pounds, 6 foot. But as far as just football player goes, that guy's on tape. His tape is amazing.
So I did want to ask you about his size, and usually that wouldn't be the first thing I would ask about a corner, but the way the Patriots are set up right now, they have Marcus Jones, who had a great first year for them. They really like him. He's 5'8". Jack Jones is really thin to play the position, even though he's a little taller than that. Those are really kind of the two young players at that spot that I think the Patriots are trying to bank on moving forward. Jonathan Jones had a good year for them this year, but he's an unrestricted free agent. So who even knows if he's back in Foxborough next year? Is he a legit 6 feet, do you think? Because I think they could use a guy who has a little bit more length on the outside. They had a real issue against true number ones this year.
I think so. I don't think you're not coveting him for his length by any means. He's not going to be like Sauce Gardner or there were some longer corners in this class, like Christian Gonzalez from Oregon and Keely Ringo from Georgia. Those guys are lengthy. You're coveting him because of that. He's not in that mold, but he's definitely not undersized. The length's not an issue for him, I'll say.
He also has this nice side benefit of, for somebody like you who tracks draft trends across the league. We know Bill Belichick likes to draft guys from his buddies' programs. So Alabama, we're always looking at Alabama guys. I am, even though I don't think anybody else is consistently, I am always looking at Rutgers guys to see if they have anyone who's even close to draftable. Because if he is, then he's on Bill Belichick's radar because of Greg Schiano. This Witherspoon pick speaks to me, Mike. It speaks to me because Brett Bielema is the head coach at Illinois, was an assistant here in New England after he was head coach at Arkansas, follows this track of gets laid off someplace, is probably still getting paid by that place, ends up in New England working for very little money. We just saw this with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. And so what's interesting about Bielema's teams I guess he's only been there a couple of years, but Illinois has had, for some reason, they've had defensive backs get to the league and play pretty well, haven't they?
Yeah, and especially this year, they're going to have 3 DBs from that secondary draft. It's not just him. It's Jartavius Martin and Sidney Brown as well are guys who are going to be day 2 or day 3 picks. So, Bielema he's building something. I mean, I'm from just outside of Champaign, so I'm not an Illinois fan, but I've been around that program, and this feels different. And I think you draft guys from players' programs, because to be successful in the Bielema program, he's going to have to do it the right way, right? Like Bielema's not going to bat, or Bielema's not going to be putting guys out there that aren't, playing football in the mold that Bill Belichick would want a guy to play football in. So I think that also speaks to why you would covet those same guys.
Is he a number one guy? Do you think? Like, is he somebody who's going to match up with stars on the other side, or is he? I mean, like, if a guy's a good number 2, he could probably have real value as a first round pick in the draft year to year. But we're talking about top half of the first round. Like, do you see him in that mold? Is he like a J.C. Horn type?
So I don't think he's quite that. So last year's cornerback class, I put the top 3 ahead of him. I was pretty high in McDuffie though as well, but I thought the top 2 were special, and Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner. The year prior to that, Patrick Surtain, J.C. Horn, I'd still put above any corner in this class. But after that, he's, for not kind of ticking all the size, speed box, all around measurable boxes, for not being an elite physical talent, just his on-field performance is about as good as you'll see from a prospect to project to the next level. So he's not quite in that realm of, size, speed freaks, but he is a damn good prospect in his own right.
And if he can play man-to-man and he can press at the line of scrimmage, as you said, like, he's going to have a place here in New England, because they still, even without a true number 1 this year, they still were near the top of the league in terms of man-to-man percentage. So interesting pick for the Patriots, potentially, from you, Mike. Mm-hmm. So I like that link. You're the first one I've seen make that. I have to ask you about another player, though, that the Patriots have been linked to in other mock drafts. I didn't see him in the first round of your mock draft. It's Broderick Jones out of Georgia, the left tackle. Seems to be a promising, if raw, type of prospect. Why do you hate Broderick Jones, Mike? Why do you hate him? Tell us.
Yeah, I think the if raw there hit the nail on the head. He's not played a lot of football, right? Year and a half as a starter at Georgia, and now that's not like a knock that he couldn't start until midway through his sophomore year, because Georgia is obviously Georgia. Like that, if that was like the case at Illinois, maybe we'd be having a little bit of a problem. But Georgia, like, they produce NFL talent at every single position, so that's going to happen. But just a guy who's only played a year and a half, you're not expecting that guy to come in and then all of a sudden block the Khalil Macks of the world, the Von Millers of the world, these high-end athletes, the Max Crosby's, Myles Garrett's. Like, yeah, I just worry about him in pass protection, because he's not the smoothest of athletes. I always say he's not the nimble elite mirror guys that succeed and do it at the next level right away. So I just see him a little bit as more of a project than maybe most, even though physically I think he is a special dude. Like, he's got the power, got the play strength. It's all there. I just think the transition may be a little rockier for him than others. So that's why I'm lower. He probably, if he does declare, ends up in the first round. But I think he could come back to school and make himself a ton of money. Like, I think he could come back to school and be like a top 5 to 10 pick next year if he falls out. But we'll see. I don't know if he's made his decision yet.
So what do you think of this tackle class this year? Because that's a position where if they don't go with corner, if they're not dying to try to find their next starter at that spot, I think they could there's an argument to be made that they could go receiver in the first round. But tackle really is a spot where if you don't get one early, it's hard to draft one and ask them to play a lot right away. And it looks like they need a guy to play a lot right away. So are there others who might be in that middle of the first round mix that you like that could sort of fill that role pretty quickly here?
Yeah, see, I don't love this tackle class. I don't think it's like any of the guys that have come out in the past handful of years that have been like OT1 or OT2. I probably like better than any of the top OTs in this class. But I will say that doesn't mean you can't find a starter. That doesn't mean you can't find a guy to make an impact. I think Peter Skoronski, the Northwestern tackle, is a viable option to step in and start right away. If that's what you're looking for, he's the best option in this draft class. He's been starting since his true freshman year at Northwestern, took over for Rashawn Slater, had one of the best pass protecting seasons we've ever graded for a Power 5 tackle this past year. I think he allowed like 6 pressures all year long. He was lights out. So big fan of his game, but he's just barely over 300 pounds. Play strength is a bit of an issue. Length does not have 33-inch arms, which is like the cutoff that most teams will look at for tackle to guard. Now, I think there's, I want to say 3 starting tackles in the NFL with sub 33-inch arms, but it is still a rarity. There's not a lot of guys in the NFL that have that. So that's the guy I'd highlight those most NFL ready. But then you have, Broderick Jones, who we touched on. Paris Johnson, the Ohio State offensive tackle, is going to be in that mix, and Anton Harrison, the Oklahoma tackle. I'd put them, all those guys, in that mix that, depending on your team, depending on what you want from an offensive tackle prospect, would make sense in the middle of the first round.
Paris Johnson's interesting to me because he's massive, right? And I wonder if that's a good idea if you're the Patriots and you already have Trent Brown on one side. Now they've gone with Trent Brown and Marcus Cannon, and those guys are behemoths. And so maybe that's something that they would love to have. But it feels like so much mass. I don't know. Is Paris Johnson athletic enough, I guess, to maybe offset whatever athleticism concerns might typically come with a guy that size?
I think so. I think he is. I think he ticks kind of the all-around boxes better than any other tackle in this class. Now, only 1 year of starting at left tackle, was a right guard last year, 2021, before taking over for Nicholas Petit-Frere. So I think he, truthfully, right now, with, as you said, like, the tackles go high. I don't care what year it is, tackles go high, just because there's only so few guys that that have the tools that NFL tackles need to have, and that's 90% of playing tackle in the NFL is just being able to be that big and that athletic. And so probably the 4 guys we mentioned here are the 4 in this class. And when there's so few in a class, that doesn't necessarily mean that, and I'm saying it's a weak class, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden that they go down boards. I think it more means they're going to go up board. So Paris Johnson's the one guy that I doubt he even makes it to the Patriots at this point, just because of the athlete that he is.
Okay, so you are significantly, I would say, probably depressing Patriots fans listening to this podcast right now, Mike. So if you were Bill Belichick, let's put you in his shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Are you stressing out? I know you just gave them a corner in your first round mock draft, but the offense was such a problem this year. Would you overextend to add somebody there, whether it's a tackle, whether it's a receiver, whether it's somebody else? Or is the talent on that side of the ball not so great that you'd be willing to do that you just take best available, and if it's a corner and go with it?
I think you just go best available in this class, especially because I think the offensive side's just very much outclassed by the defensive side in this draft class. Corner's strong, edge is strong. I think safety's a strong class too. And on the offensive side, the only position that I'd say is deep is running back. I don't think offensive line's great. At tight end, I'd say is also a good class. Tight end and running back are good classes, but that's like the 2 least valuable positions on offense. That's the last place you're looking right now if you're the New England Patriots, probably. So I really would not love forcing a wide receiver unless, maybe like a Quentin Johnson falls. I would not love the idea of forcing a tackle unless, Paris Johnson does fall. I just don't think this is a great year to say, I have to go get offense, unfortunately.
All right, Patriots fans. So you want offense. That's what free agency is for, is what Mike is telling you, basically, this year. Might have to go with a defender in the first round. Mike, thank you for keeping it real for us. As sad as our listeners may be right now, that's okay. There's still hope. There's still hope. Listen, maybe the offense is just going to be middling for like the foreseeable future, and you try to go and turn the clock back, which is always a smart thing to try to do in the NFL, and just ride a defense to contention. That's basically where we're at right now, I guess.
You go trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Isn't he just available? That seems like where I'd explore right now.
Would you really? 31?
I think so. On the Patriots. Now it's it's asking price is always what it comes back to. But like, if you really want to see if Mac Jones has got it, DeAndre Hopkins for at least one more year is going to have it. And because he never relied on athleticism, right? That's not his game.
It's not, but it just does always bother me when a guy who's already slow may be getting even slower. Like at some point that like you just cross the threshold there where it gets to be dangerous. What would you be willing to give up for him? Would you give up a first round pick for him? He's under contract for a few more years. I think. Okay.
Not even close. I mean, I'd be hesitant to give up a second just because contract, like I said, he is under that much. So maybe like a third and a fourth, maybe that.
Would you give up David Johnson for him?
Yes. Again.
All right, Mike. Hey, yeah, that was a good trade by Bill O'Brien. That's the other thing. Like if you bring in DeAndre Hopkins now, you might not be able to get Bill O'Brien to be your offensive coordinator. Like
or Cliff to be your assistant, your analyst.
I don't know. Like how many bridges are torched there, and whether you want to be welcoming him. Mike, always great to have you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, your infinite wisdom on the NFL draft with us at this early stage of the draft process. We really appreciate it. Our listeners love hearing from you. So thanks again, buddy.
For sure, Phil. Thanks for having me on there.
Great stuff there from Mike. And no, it doesn't look like there will be a great opportunity for the Patriots offense to add in the first round, but you never know. Maybe the tackle from Ohio State is within striking distance, whether he's at 14 overall or maybe he slides to 12 or 13, and it makes sense to trade up because that is such a glaring need for the Patriots next season that maybe you'd be willing to make that move and give up whatever draft capital you would have to make sure you went and got your guy at that position. I just think because the defense already it was so stout in 2022, and it finished near the top of the league. And I understand they had their difficulties against elite quarterbacks, but they also, I thought, did a heck of a job in spurts against one of the best offenses in football in week one. Tua Tagovailoa and that group scored just 13 points. And I know it was their first game and a new offense with a new coach, but 13 points is 13 points for that group. They didn't have many duds this season with Tua Tagovailoa behind center. Joe Burrow, they shut out for an entire half. Aaron Rodgers, they made look bad for an entire half. Josh Allen, really in the two games that he played the Patriots, didn't sniff some of the production that he had last year against the Patriots, where he's putting up 40-plus points, 24 points in a game where the Bills basically, I think because of failures on the offensive end for the Patriots, the Bills basically doubled up the Patriots in terms of time of possession in their Week 13 meeting. And then in Week 18, you give up 21 points offensively, 2 touchdowns get taken back on kickoffs, but you give up 21 points offensively against one of the best quarterbacks in football, and you don't have any corners to speak of. Now, that's no slight to Marcus Jones, who I think had a really, really good season, and I know his team thinks really highly of him moving forward, but it looks like the pieces are there for the defense to have continued success. Offensively, if you could find a real piece in the first round, that would go a long way, in my opinion, in terms of their improvement. You add into that a new chief on the offensive side of the ball and that coaching staff, and now you might be cooking with gas and being able to work your way back into some of those rankings and some of those spots statistically where you were in 2021. Let's just do a little stock up, stock down, sort of a after the season, post-mortem, how we're going to look ahead by looking back here on Next Pats. We've done plenty of looking back on the Patriots Talk podcast, looking ahead to potential coordinators on the Patriots offense. Clearly, to me, the favorite and the leader in the clubhouse to be back here in New England and running the Patriots offense in 2023 and maybe beyond would be Bill O'Brien. We've talked about that ad nauseum. You get a chance to go back to some of the things that Mac Jones ran in 2021 under Josh McDaniels. Similar language, similar concepts. You can even add some things from the Alabama offense that Mac Jones helped teach to Bill O'Brien a couple of off seasons ago. You also avoid importing another new scheme, another new language, another new system for the third time in 3 years for your promising second-year quarterback. So there's Bill O'Brien. What about Cliff Kingsbury? If I was Cliff Kingsbury, I'm not sure I would love this opportunity. Now, maybe he's such a football junkie and he sees such potential in Mac Jones, and he really wants to show the world that it was him, not Kyler Murray, or not even that, but just the fact that it was things beyond his control that led to his demise in Arizona, and that he could turn things around in New England. Maybe he wants to go back to work, but he's under contract through 2027 with Arizona. They're going to be paying him a lot of money over the next few years. Does he want to come to New England to work 20-hour days, not have an incredibly significant title potentially, and be making about the same amount of money that he would be making just to sit at home? That one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, although I guess we have to leave the door open for that one because he has the established relationship with Bill Belichick as a player here. Briefly in New England, Bill Belichick was just very complimentary of Cliff Kingsbury before those two coaches competed against one another late in the season, in the 2022 season here. So leave the door open for Kingsbury. One more name that should be familiar to Patriots fans that I've been told would consider the job if presented to him for sure would be Chad O'Shea. Chad O'Shea is in Cleveland right now. He's the pass game coordinator for the Browns. He was previously the offensive coordinator for the Dolphins. Now with Brian Flores, did that for a year before being fired at the end of that season. Very odd sort of situation there where the Dolphins got better and better. One of the worst teams in NFL history early that season. They ended up competing towards the end. We know they actually beat the Patriots at home in 2019, and they knocked down the Patriots in terms of their playoff seeding, and, had nothing to play for other than to help try to ruin New England's season. And they beat Tom Brady in his last regular season game at Gillette Stadium. Players are essentially carrying Chad O'Shea off the field, and then he ends up getting fired soon thereafter. But somebody who would be interesting for a couple different reasons. Obviously, again, like O'Brien, he'd be able to re-import the old Patriots offense, the old Patriots language, the Josh McDaniels stuff that Mac Jones was really comfortable with last year. But he also would, and this might be attractive to Bill Belichick, also bring with him some expertise in the West Coast style system that Bill Belichick tried to run in 2022. Everyone thinks of it as the Shanahan style offense, and it is, but Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak go way back together in Denver and put that thing together, the two of them. Kubiak ends up taking it with him wherever he goes, whether it's Houston. Late in his career, he goes up to Minnesota. He works with someone by the name of Kevin Stefanski, who is now the head coach in Cleveland, who now runs a similar system there with the Browns. O'Shea's been there the last few years. He would have the, I think, unique blend of being able to do some of the Shanahan stuff and some of the old Patriots stuff that could be really enticing for Bill Belichick. So there's three names there. Let's do a little stock up, stock down as sort of a look back to 2022, but also next Pat's here, look ahead to what's next. This will be sort of our way of figuring out what are their greatest needs going into the offseason and which position groups should be thought of first and foremost by Bill Belichick and his staff as they try to figure out what's coming in 2023. Let's start at the quarterback position. I think now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're trying to project out to 2023 and what we might get from that position versus what the Patriots got from that position in 2022, when it comes to quarterback, I'm going to say the stock has to be up, right? If they're going to make a change at the coaching spot, and we assume that will be an upgrade in terms of someone with a little bit more offensive experience, somebody that'll make Mac Jones a little bit more comfortable off the bat, somebody that Mac Jones will be able to buy into a little bit more readily. I think you have to assume that things will look better in 2023 versus 2022. If they don't, then the Patriots are probably looking to move on from Mac Jones in the foreseeable future, right? This is an all-important year 3. If you're going to extend a guy, if you're going to figure out whether or not he's part of your core, part of your foundation moving forward, it has to happen essentially at that position by year 3. So it has to be pointing up. Arrow has to be pointing up for Mac Jones at that quarterback spot. Running back, I'm going to say that the arrow is pointing up as well. Now, I know Damian Harris may leave via free agency. And I'm not saying that Kevin Harris is ready to fill in his shoes, but the position that I'm actually a little bit more intrigued by within that position group is what they might have in the receiving back role. I think Ramondre Stevenson as an early down back is phenomenal. And I think even if Damian Harris leaves, as long as Stevenson can remain healthy, and we saw him get tired as the season wore on here, so he will need a hand. But as long as he can stay mostly healthy, he's going to be great. And the loss of Damian Harris, I think, would be mitigated to a large degree by Stevenson staying healthy. But the Patriots really did not have a third down back this year. It ended up being Ramondre Stevenson, and he ended up leading the team in receptions. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't be a part of the passing game moving forward, but I'll be fascinated to see if Pierre Strong can turn into a full-time sub back for this team, a la James White, a la Rex Burkhead, a la Danny Woodhead, any of these guys. And I think some of those were a little bit more versatile than maybe Pierre Strong will end up being, but he has looked so athletic and so quick at times with the football. We know he has the great straight line speed, but we've seen him make a number of different tacklers miss on just a handful of opportunities with the ball in his hands in 2022. So based on what I've seen from Strong, and just based on him getting more experience and being able to spell Ramondre Stevenson a little bit more, maybe that helps Stevenson's overall production and give them something that they really didn't have this year in a true third down back. I'm going to go ahead and say the stock's pointing up at that position group. A receiver, that's harder to say. I'm going to say the stock's pointing down. Now, of course, we're doing this before free agency. We're doing this before the draft. So we'll have to do it again once those things are through and we can get a fuller picture of what these position groups will look like. But right now, Jakobi Meyers is set to be an unrestricted free agent, and he's going to be one of the 2 or 3, in my opinion, best receivers on the market. That equals dollar signs. And will the Patriots be willing and able to keep Jakobi Meyers around by offering him a deal that he will get somewhere else? I'm not sure. Now, the Patriots have plenty of space to play with in terms of their cap this offseason, and I'm not sure somebody like Jakobi Meyers is necessarily going to break the bank. I wrote about him earlier today on NBC Sports Boston.com because he won the Ed Block Courage Award, which to me is just a reminder of what he could bring to the table, to the Patriots as a leader. He's tough. He produces. He's somebody who checks a lot of boxes in terms of what you're looking for in a locker room beacon. And this team is a team that could be looking for real leadership next year if Devin McCourty ends up retiring, if Matthew Slater ends up retiring. Yes, you have Juwan Bentley, you have Dietrich Wise, you have David Andrews, you have Mac Jones. All those guys will be returning captains. But that's going to be a massive void to fill if those 2 guys at the top of that food chain, McCourty and Slater, aren't in the mix in 2023. So the existing captains, yep, they have to step up. Their voices have to be elevated. They have to do more. But who else can help fill in to the gaps left behind? I've been told by players that Meyers makes a lot of sense as that kind of guy if they can keep him. He's not under contract. And so if I'm the Patriots, I would be willing to extend, not overextend, not get ridiculously aggressive to keep him around, but give him a market offer. Offer him what Curtis Samuel got in 2021, another slot receiver whose best season in 2020, right before he got signed by Washington in 2021, matches up really well with Jakobi Meyers' best season. Now, he's faster, and so maybe he's viewed as more of a game changer, and maybe that's why he ended up getting the deal he got. But Jakobi Meyers has been healthier. He does much more in the run game for a team like New England. That would have a lot of value, and they know what he can do in the run game for them and their schemes. Plus, he gets open. He's not a burner, but he gets open, and he has produced these last 2 seasons as long as he's been on the field. So Curtis Samuel ends up with a 3-year deal in the low 30s millions of dollars range. That's something that Jakobi Meyers should be looking at too. And I think whatever he ends up getting offered by the Patriots, I think it probably should be more than what Nelson Aguilar was offered. Now, I know when Aguilar was offered the deal that he got, it was because they were projecting out and they saw him be a number one receiver for the Raiders and making plays down the field. And, that's what gets paid in this league. I understand that. But Myers has so vastly outperformed everything that Aguilar has done these last 2 seasons when the two guys were teammates. Can you make him an offer that would end up being less than what Nelson Aguilar was offered a couple off seasons ago without insulting Jacoby Myers? I'm not sure. So that's somebody that I really would try to make sure is still around, because if you don't keep him around, well, now you're talking about Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, Tyquan Thornton at that position. You could say, well, Thornton's going to be in his second year. You expect him to make a leap. I'm not sure. He sort of tailed off a little bit and then came back to life at the very end of the season. But I'm not sure. I don't know what Tyquan Thornton will be next year in terms of role and how significant that role will be. So I'm going to say right now at that position, stock is going down. Tight end, let's say the stock is going down there as well. In all likelihood, it's probably going to remain flat. But you know what? Let's say it remains flat, at least at this point. Because if I'm going to be consistent, I would have to think that whatever offensive changes get made to the staff, not only do they help Mac Jones, but they help Hunter Henry too. Jonnu Smith, I'm not so sure. I don't know what that role could be moving forward, but a little more consistency on the coaching end of things could lead to more consistency from the tight end. So let's say that one remains neutral for right now. Offensive line, I'm going to say the stock is pointing up. I'm actually way more optimistic on some of these positions than I thought I was going to be. But again, it has to be pointing up, doesn't it? Cole Strange has to be better in year 2 than he was in year 1. Mike Renner played at a Pro Bowl level this year, and he's only gaining experience and understanding what opposing defensive linemen are trying to do to him. I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes a better player in year 2. The tackle spot, the right tackle spot in particular, it has to be better. We don't know who it is, right? We just heard from Mike Renner. Maybe it ends up being a rookie. Maybe it ends up being a free agent. Again, the Patriots have some money to play with. It'd be worthwhile for them to just go out and buy a tackle if they want to make sure that they can get somebody who plays right away, as opposed to drafting a rookie and hoping against hope. Trent Brown, inconsistency was the name of the game for him in Vegas, and it felt similarly this year. Now, he ended up playing more in New England than he did when he was in Vegas for a couple of years, but the penalties, the holds, the jumping off sides, it smacked of lack of focus. So can you get him zeroed in? I'm not sure. Those are all big questions for me. But again, maybe you get a different coach in there. Matt Patricia really ended up not being the offensive line coach, even though that was his title. It's just too much. It's too much to do all the play calling and all the offensive coordinator duties and coach the offensive line. One of the hardest positions in the sport to coach, maybe the hardest right after quarterback. So it ended up being Billy Yates. Do they stay with Billy Yates? Does Matt Patricia bump over to offensive line full time with a new potential play caller and offensive coordinator, quote unquote, in the building? We'll see how all that works. But I'm actually going to say the stock is pointing up because I think you're going to have to see improvement from guys like Renner, Strange, and whoever's playing at right tackle. So I feel pretty good about where that offensive line is going. I feel like it's going to be going up. Special teams, not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. And I love who they have at the returner spot. You guys know how big a fan I am of Marcus Jones. If you followed this podcast going back to last year's draft season, I'm curious as to how they handle punter. It looks like Jake Bailey's no longer going to be with the team. He's already filed a grievance against the Patriots for suspending him. He was caught off guard by that suspension, according to his agent. Bill Belichick's asked a lot of questions about Jake Bailey leading up to the season finale and after, because man, oh man, they could have used a guy who kicked a few touchbacks in that game against Buffalo. So question mark at punter, and I think question mark at kicker. I don't know if Nick Folk is going to be back at his age, and given where his leg might be, as consistent as all get out for the most part from shorter range. He did miss a couple of extra point attempts that would have, in my opinion, changed the game against the Bengals. But does he want to keep playing given where he's at in his career? And so where does that leave you at kicker? Question mark there as well. So stock pointing down for special teams. Defensive line, I'm going stock up because Tristan Barmore to me was an absolute monster at the end of the season. If he can stay healthy, and that was a big if obviously for him this year, dealt with a knee injury week 6, sapped him of a lot of playing time this year. But if he stays healthy, I think he's going to work his way into the conversation as one of the best 5 or 6 defensive tackles in football. He is just so big. He's long. He's powerful. He's explosive. He has just about every tool you would want. And I think with more experience, remember, this is a guy who didn't play a whole lot of college football, but he was so outstanding in the amount that he played. He was talked about as a potential first-round pick a couple years ago. So with Christian Barmore, with Devon Godchaux, who I thought had a really good year and was one of the reasons why the Patriots ended up being a top 5 run defense, even with the massive games that they allowed to on the ground to Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields. You take those games out and you talk about just more traditional running games, how the Patriots performed. It was out of this world when you look at some of the numbers. And they still were in the top 5, even with those quarterback run games included. Top 5 run defense. Devon Godchaux is a big part of that to me. Lawrence Guy is a big part of that to me as well. Dietrich Wise, I include him in the defensive line group, not necessarily the outside linebacker group, even though he's an edge player oftentimes. But he had, I thought, in some ways, a breakout season, especially early in the season. I think he was playing through some things by the end of the year as well, but he was dynamic for them in the run and against the pass. So I like where this defensive line is headed. So their stock is pointing up to me. Again, linebacker, not necessarily a position that we're going to be talking about as a massive, massive need for this team, which is wild based on where we were last year and talking about some of the players, whether it was Devin Lloyd or others at that off-the-ball linebacker spot. We thought the Patriots needed one, right? Needed one. And then Juwan Bentley comes out and has a career year. And Jelani Tavai, again, these guys are who they are. They are big-bodied linebackers that love to play against the run. But they were versatile enough as edge pieces. What we saw Dante Hightower do for a long time. They didn't play at that level, but they were good enough to be on the field a lot in 2022. And I would anticipate the same is true in 2023. Maybe they do try to add some more athleticism at the second level going into next year because Mack Wilson didn't really work out. Raekwon McMillan ended up working out, in my opinion. It felt like when he was on the field, he flashed. He actually played through a broken thumb, I was told, at the end of the season for a good chunk of the season. So he didn't play maybe quite as much as he was hoping to, but he's somebody who showed up. But he's a guy, like Jacoby Myers, who's not under contract for next year. So can you really depend on what he's doing next season as part of, the Patriots plans? So I think there can be an addition. I like what they have at off the ball linebacker. I don't think it's necessarily something that you have to overextend for in the first round of this year's draft or overpay for in free agency because you have a bunch of guys under contract there that can play. And at outside linebacker, Matthew Judon, strong from start to finish this year. You got to give it to him. Maybe there are a couple hiccups in there in the last couple months of the season, but I thought he was impactful even in the season finale against the Bills. And Josh Uche for his period was the hottest pass rusher in the league. So this is a unit that overall, to me, this is a stock up unit. I don't want to forget about Anthony Jennings either, because on early downs, if you combine Uche and Jennings, what Jennings has the ability to do against the run, which we saw in spurts this year, and Uche and what he can do against the pass, you have a pretty effective duo there on one side with Judon on the other. I like that group. Right now. Let's get into the secondary. I think you're looking at 2 position groups that might be stocked down. Devin McCourty could be gone at safety. And I know Kyle Duggar, you anticipate that he's still on the incline and maybe that helps make up for it. But without McCourty being the quarterback of the defense, that to me has to be a stock down for the safety position. I'm going stock down at corner as well. And it's not because I don't like the Jones duo at corner for the Patriots, Marcus and Jack. I think those guys both can play. And as far as Jack Jones goes with the suspension at the end of the year, I talked to a couple of his veteran teammates recently, and they didn't feel like it was a big deal in terms of him moving forward and his standing with the team moving forward. Obviously, you'd like to avoid those types of situations, but a young player makes a mistake, was in a situation where he got hurt, didn't handle it right, but learned from it. And I think the Patriots as an organization will be able to move on and continue to lean on him as a promising young player moving forward. I like those 2 Jones corners, but Jonathan Jones might be gone again. Free agency could end up hurting this team. And Jalen Mills disappears at the end of the season with a groin injury. They really struggle against number one, quote unquote, number one targets, as we talked about with Mike Renner. So what's his fit in this defense moving forward? Can he stay healthy? Is he, exhibiting what the Patriots want in terms of leadership and grit and toughness and the ability to stay on the field? The most important ability is availability, right? Jalen Mills didn't have that at the end of the year. So a lot of question marks to me as to how the veteran portion of the cornerback room will look moving forward. So they're stocked down as well. Overall, I'll say I felt way more glass half full during that exercise, stock up, stock down, than I thought I would. So maybe that gives Patriots fans some hope. Thanks again to Mike Renner for joining us here on Next Pats this week. Thanks to you all for listening. Continue to listen not only to this podcast, but also to Patriots Talk. Again, we got so much going on. We will keep you up to the minute in terms of the information that comes into us. We'll share it with you. Want to let you guys know before we go, the NFL playoffs begin with Super Wildcard Weekend. That's right. On Saturday night, Justin Herbert and the Chargers head to Jacksonville to battle Trevor Lawrence and the Jags at 7:30 Eastern on NBC and Peacock. And on Sunday night, the Ravens meet Joe Burrow and the Bengals in Cincinnati at 7:30 on NBC and Peacock. Enjoy the games this weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you next week on Next Pats.